morning, everyone, and welcome to the Morris County Chamber of Commerce and Economic Development Corporation's Meet the Candidate series. I'm Megan Huncher. I'm President and CEO of the Morris County Chamber and EDC. On behalf of myself and the Chamber staff and board, we welcome you to our Meet the Candidate series in this fall. We hope you're all doing well and that you're able to watch either from the comfort of your own home, your office, or on Facebook Live. So welcome. Firstly, I would like to thank Senator Kean for being with us today. I'd also like to thank Alan Zakin for his leadership of our Government Affairs Committee, and also Michael Stanzilis, our VP of Membership and Business Development, for serving in the Government Affairs Liaison role. So thanks to all of them. Today you'll hear from Alan, and Michael will be moderating the questions. As you will see, if you're joining us from Zoom, there is an opportunity to ask questions in the Q&A. Please put your questions in Q&A and not the chat so we can make sure that we capture all of them. At the Chamber, we connect, we convene, we educate, we advocate. Now, of course, we're doing that all virtually. So we invite you to visit our website to learn more about what we do and all of the upcoming events, which Alan will speak about shortly. So thank you again for being with us. And now I'll turn it over to Alan Zakin.
This is our candidate series for the Chamber. We've had Senator Kean's opponent previously, and there's two congressional districts in Morris County, and Senator Kean is running in the western part. He also represents another part of the district, Chatham and Long Hill, and has represented other parts of the district. And then we have another district where Congresswoman Cheryl is opposed by Rosemary Becci. Congresswoman Cheryl will appear in a forum on October 14th at noon, and then her opponent, Rosemary Becci, will appear the next day, October 15th at noon. We also, in conjunction with the Morris ELC that I chair also, and the New Jersey Business and Industry Association, led their government affairs office led by Chris Ubuteas, and we will have a event on September 22nd at 2 p.m. with the Assembly Budget Chair, Assemblywoman Eliana Pinter-Marin. And right now we had a 3-month budget, and now they're in the throes, and Senator Kean is involved in his Senate duties in a 9-month budget. And with that, we're about to get to our featured speaker we're pleased to have. I'll mention a couple of things. There is a chat function. That's where you can put comments and introduce yourselves. There is a way to save your chat. If you look on the bottom right, if you click on chat, there's 3 dots. And if you click on that, you could save it, so you could save all the other information of hopefully everyone can log in and put their information. And also make sure to put your questions in Q&A. And Mike Stanzilis will be leading that. And again, we're pleased to have Senator Kean. I think we all have known him from his representation of the 21st District, which has included various parts of Morris, and he's always been very open and accessible and participating in our forums, and is now opposing Congressman Malinowski in the western part of Morris County, and I think 4 other counties for Congress. And with that, we'll have some introductory remarks from Senator Kean, and then open it up to questions. So please, a virtual welcome for Senator Tom Kean.
Thank you. It's great to be back, and it's 5 other counties. It's great to be back with you. I know I've been with you in a whole slew of times, and I've always enjoyed the conversation, whether it's in a format like this or in person. And like Alan and everybody else on the call, look forward to getting together more and more frequently in person. So thank you all for everything you do for Morris County and the surrounding communities to make the county more prosperous and keep more and more families able to stay together in Morris County going forward. Several months ago, I was in a veterans event in Cranford in Union County. And I heard the story about a 92-year-old World War II veteran. And people that were telling the story were saying that they would go up, they would thank the veteran for all of his service and the things he'd done in World War II. And the only response was, "Don't screw it up." That was a simple, straightforward response. When you look down at what's going on in the House of Representatives right now, with the massive increases in taxes, stripping away protections for police officers who are trying to do their jobs, new regulations, massive changes in healthcare infrastructure. I think a lot of people on this call would think that they're just screwing things up, and they're actually not doing the things that are going to make Morris County and New Jersey far more affordable and safer over time. I've got a long history of reaching across the aisle to find bipartisan solutions to actually accomplish things, and things that have made meaningful impact for the people on this call and throughout the state of New Jersey, on issues like transportation and infrastructure. I led the way to make sure that the Gateway project, that New Jersey would pay only a quarter. New York, for the first time, would pay a quarter, its fair share, and the federal government would be paying half. Made sure that Port Authority was a lot more efficient, a lot more effective. I worked on a bi-state, bipartisan basis to get that straightened out, so less taxpayer dollars would be used in that regard. The infrastructure for the Gateway project going forward is incredibly important, and we've got the right type of oversight from the state level. We need to get an individual who has a long history of understanding and implementing infrastructure projects down to Washington, D.C., to make sure that the Gateway project, which is a national security project, in addition to a major economic project, actually gets completed. Likewise, we need an individual who understands how to fix a broken healthcare system. When the next Congress starts, you want to know that there are going to be people in that room and in that chamber who know the importance of making sure that the broken healthcare system is fixed. And I've got a history of making sure in the state legislature that we lower the cost of prescription drugs. We make sure that we continue things like covering pre-existing conditions, and that's an effort that I will continue to lead down in Washington, D.C., making sure that children can stay on their parents' healthcare coverage up until 26. But we also need to make sure that there are new things we need to do, because I've made sure, for example, that the physical health, mental health, and addiction services are all treated the exact same from insurance companies. So I've been leading the way to make sure that people can have the right affordable health care in their lives. But when you go down to Washington, D.C., you need to bring not only that type of experience of reaching across the aisle, actually finding the solutions and getting things done, but you also need to say what the next step is. The current COVID environment has really exposed a lot of the infrastructure problems with the healthcare system. So whether it's the skilled nursing facilities, the nursing homes, and a variety of other things, we need an individual who knows that when we go down there, those systems were designed for sort of 1950s, where you had two people to a room, didn't have negative pressure ventilation. You've got to figure out ways to make sure that that system is fixed in a way and funded in a way that is different, and reimbursed for New Jersey in a way that actually is better, not only for New Jersey, but for all Americans going forward. And so that's part of the issue. You also need to have an individual who knows how to grow the economy. And so for me, in my district, we've done major broad-based structural changes in lowering the cost of taxes in many different ways across New Jersey. But it's also, for me, it doesn't matter whether it's Bell Labs or brew pubs. These are innovators who want to grow the economy, want to continue to stay in New Jersey and grow their businesses. We want to make sure that, especially as we safely grow our way out of the current COVID crisis, that we need to make sure that we have somebody who understands supply chains, and making sure that not only the port authorities and the port itself continues to grow and remain strong, but also that the manufacturing supply chain in New Jersey continues to grow. And whether that's in many different innovative areas, that's what we need to do in New Jersey to make sure we can continue to grow our economy. And that's why organizations like the National Chamber of Commerce have endorsed my candidacy, because they understand that not only have I found solutions throughout my course and my tenure, but they know that going forward, the only way you're going to get a fixed Congress, which therefore is going to help the American people, is by getting people down there who are going to reach across the aisle and find the important solutions on the issues that are important to the people in New Jersey. You also need to have somebody who understands that protecting the environment is key. As many of you may know, I did meet my wife at the Environmental Protection Agency. We raised our our kids to respect the environment. I mean, years ago, all the way back in 2007, I did sponsor the Global Warming Response Act, and that's the law of New Jersey, but for focusing on innovative technologies, clean car, offshore wind. Those are all things we need to continue to push, and we also need to make sure that there is no offshore drilling off the coast of New Jersey. So there are a variety of solutions that I have advocated and will continue to advocate. And we're looking for finding a real solution down in Washington, D.C. And it's going to start with somebody who understands that we need to restore the SALT deduction back to New Jersey as part of any economic recovery package. And my opponent has talked a great deal about things that have to happen and has actually never achieved any real solutions that have actually impacted the people of this state, as opposed to my long history of finding real solutions. My opponent also voted for H.R. 3, which is a bill that would functionally destroy the life sciences industry in New Jersey. 58,000 jobs would be lost in New Jersey. Many patents would be lost. It wouldn't lower the overall cost of health insurance and health coverage, and all those things. So he voted for a piece of legislation that would do that, instead of saying there are ways we can lower the cost of prescription drugs, get rid of surprise medical billing, and also make sure that we have more transparency in the process. But that wasn't the way. And then on top of that, my opponent voted for a bill that I was able to help, that I helped kill in the state Senate, that exists right now in California. Many of you may know as AB 5. In the House of Representatives, it was called the PRO Act. And the PRO Act would get rid of, would disallow independent contractors. And if you don't have an independent contractor, and many people on this call know that many people who have two-income families need a lot more flexibility, not only to earn income to pay the high taxes that currently exist in New Jersey, but also have the flexibility to take care of their families. If you reduce that as an option, that ends up really hurting a lot of business and families in New Jersey. So you need to get an individual who can go down to Washington, D.C., who understands the priorities of fellow New Jerseyans and has actually solved problems on behalf of people of all of New Jersey, but specifically throughout the region of the 7th Congressional District. And that's what I've done in my entire legislative career. And that's why I'm going to go down to Washington, D.C. to find the solutions on behalf of the people on this call and people across this district. Thank you, Alan.
You're muted, Alan.
Appreciate that. I'm still rookie mistake. I make it all the time. Apologize. So Mike's been monitoring the questions, and I'm sure he has a few informative questions for our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Senator, for being here today, and we'll get right to it. We have a question from Ryan Clarker that you already pretty much answered, specifically about offshore oil drilling. But let's drill down into that a little more here from Ryan, and these are good questions, Ryan. What are your environmental policies specifically to the Penn East pipeline? So you already talked about offshore oil drilling, but what about the Penn East pipeline?
I oppose the Penn East pipeline, and I think it's done too many short cuts from eminent domain and other things, and I think we need to block it in any way we can. Likewise, I've been an opponent of the Pilgrim pipeline, which would have come through big chunks of Morris County, Union County, and would have brought oil in from Canada and brought it back up. And so I've been working. I've stopped the Pilgrim pipeline, and likewise down in South Jersey, the Pinelands pipeline. I was one of the people who opposed the Chris Christie's nominees in that regard, who just try to get many of the regulations out of the way. So I think there are ways you can actually grow the economy by working with it through innovative solutions with many different environmental protection, as well as energy generating solutions, so we can continue to be more energy and completely energy independent as a country. But I don't think that the Penn East or the Pilgrim are part of those solutions.
Great, thank you. Another environmentally related question, and this one is near and dear to my heart, actually, but from Ryan Clarker. We have an issue in Morris County with Lake Hopatcong that local leadership needs help from the federal representatives. Actually, Lake Hopatcong touches on 3 different congressional districts. Of course, CD7 is one of them. So.
Yes. Well, yes, we need a federal partner, and believe me, Tony Bucco, Steve Oraho, and Joe Panaccio, as well as the assembly members and many of the mayors actually probably on this phone call talked to me a great deal about that, and any way that we can get the federal funding to help in any way to make sure that we have a clean Lake Hopatcong is extraordinarily important. And that's but I think what you need to do is you need to get an individual down to Washington D.C. I grew up as a twin. And so for me, everything's been a team sport since the day I was born. And so we need to get an individual down there who can actually identify many of these environmental issues across the state and work on a bipartisan basis to get them resolved and have a federal government that's far more efficient than it currently is.
Great, thank you. Great question coming up from David Michael. As you mentioned the PRO Act, he says, I do a small scale interior design and have operated as a freelancer with great success for the better part of 8 years. The PRO Act would destroy the way I do business. Why is your opponent pushing the PRO Act so hard? I've sent him so many emails and calls, and I know others have as well.
Yeah, it's the only answer is he's voted with Nancy Pelosi 97% of the time, and he follows her direction and others in her leadership on every one of the major issues, whether they impact New Jersey or not. And what you need is an individual down in Washington, D.C., who can be completely independent and fight on behalf of the constituents. It sends that individual down there. I mean, I had a situation in my hometown of Westfield. A woman who had started a business in California had to actually move to New Jersey. And she, because of AB5, which was the PRO Act in California, and she called me up and said, I can't believe this. The PRO Act or AB5 is chasing me to New Jersey. And so we need to, and we were able to stop it in the state legislature. And we're doing everything we can to make sure it never gets seen. But we also need to have the type of individual down to Washington, D.C., who's going to stand up for the independent contractors and stand up for the small business people, stand up for the people, the nonprofits in New Jersey, who understand that you need the independent contracting system to make this, to be able to afford to provide for your family, as well as have the flexibility to take care of your family in so many different ways, especially as the environment is now changing from education and figuring out what those platforms are, higher and high school and grade school. We need to make sure that from a business development and other ways that there's a lot more flexibility. And if you get rid of the independent contracting system, you will destroy thousands of jobs in New Jersey and many different economies.
Thank you so much for that detailed answer. So we're going to move into a little bit of healthcare discussion now. There's a few questions relative to that. So we'll start out with Senator Kean. Do you think a COVID-19 vaccine could come from our area? There are a lot of biotech scientists and researchers at companies like Pfizer who have said they're working on a vaccine. Is there anything the state or federal government can do to promote that? It would be a big deal for New Jersey in this question's opinion, and I agree.
Well, I think it would be really important, and we'd have a lot of pride. And we already have a lot of pride in our New Jersey family. We've got the hardest working, most well-educated, most productive workforce of any other state in the country. And they're a dynamic workforce, and scientists and the attorneys and the compliance people and the researchers are doing everything that they can to work in a partnership way, a safe partnership way, to make sure that there is a cure and a vaccine for COVID. Just like you saw down in Rutgers, where there was that company that partnered on the testing kits, that was a New Jersey-based company that worked to find the solutions. And the way that you actually allow that to happen is you don't allow a bill like H.R. 3, which would basically be like getting rid of the tank production factory during World War II. That's what the effect is of a bill like H.R. 3. So what you have to do is you've got to go forward and say in a safe way that meets every single federal government standard, but can be done in a way that is overlapping in its testing facilities. You don't go A to B or A to Z, but you end up having them parallel tracks, always making sure that you have safety and reliability first. But you've got to have, and then you've got to have a way that you can say to people, this is a safe and effective treatment. But you, for the next COVID or for any other treatment, you've got to make sure that that manufacturing facility is in New Jersey. And the way you do that is you lower supply chains, you create a partnership with the federal government. I mean, right now in Massachusetts, as many people here know, you don't know where MIT ends and the business begins. You don't know, but you do know that the tax code is predictable. And so people who are, understand and we're losing companies not only to Massachusetts and to Pennsylvania, but we're losing it to other places. So if you have a partner in Washington, D.C., who actually understands how to grow businesses, how to find solutions, how to make the argument on a bipartisan basis, because it's about jobs and skill sets and education. All those things are tied together where we can have our education and our innovation sweet spot, because that's who we are as a society. We're fighting for the innovators.
Can I ask you to add to that a little bit? I appreciate your leadership in pushing through some support for some of the manufacturing here in New Jersey to bring the supply chain back. And there is a bill during this budget process in the state going through to help with that, to help manufacturers be able to produce more PPE locally, bring the supply chain domestic, help train some of the folks that are unfortunately unemployed due to COVID to give them long-term careers where maybe they worked at fast food or retail, but to give them careers in STEM jobs and manufacturing. And could you talk about it a little bit? There's one bill to work with NJMEP to train folks, and it went through the Senate Labor Committee, but it's in the Assembly. I think it's waiting for to be posted.
The NJNEP, as you know, is an extraordinary organization. So is this one. I mean, the Morris County Chamber, when COVID struck and when people were trying to figure out how you safely grow the economy, what standards need to happen, Morris County Chamber was in the forefront of finding the solutions that can both keep people safe as well as grow the economy. And so I want to applaud you for so many of the recommendations that you all made so that we can, but I think one of the things that we understood, and we did a little bit better than New York in the very beginning, and Pennsylvania as well, was that the governor recognized in the first couple of days that certain key business positions like manufacturing and transactions and things like that had to happen. And so we were a little bit different because we came in about 48 hours after New York on those fronts. I think those were some important first steps that allowed more people to work, but he's not allowed any type of flexibility really going forward. So we've got to have incentives for small businesses to grow here, for PPE to be, constructed, to be made here. So we sort of shorten the supply chains, and the ideas in the bills and the efforts of NJMEP allow for that, but it also means that we have to tie in the education part and getting an individual down to Washington, D.C. who understands the importance of not only reforming the education funding formula in New Jersey and has made many different, has made a proposal to do so, but also understands we need to get more than 3% of the money from our education budget from the federal government. So we need to get more money back. We need to understand how to do that from a special needs component, because right now IDEA is not fully funded in the way that it needs to be. But we also need to make sure that we have whatever the technological platforms are that we deliver the next generation of education, that New Jersey's at the forefront. I was the prime sponsor of a bill that allowed for, as we were going into remote learning on the high school level, I was one of the people who said, let's have the remote learning, let's have this platform, let's also make sure you can have a safe food supply for the people who are on that front. So as we were focusing on that, I not only had that platform that helped make sure there's education across the state, we also increased telehealth for the first time, so we were able to do that on a real basis. And I also reduced the liability for doctors and nurses and other frontline professionals, so that when they were going into the COVID, in the pandemic as it was going through, that they could make many of the important decisions that were keeping people safe without many of the liability concerns that were being faced at the time.
Senator, if I may just add something related, you mentioned federal support and so forth. Obviously, we have a lot of businesses still closed, that government mandated by the state. or partially open, and a lot of former employees that are unemployed. Could you discuss your view in federal aid for the employees as we got originally with PPP, and also for the businesses themselves, direct aid to the businesses? Thank you.
Well, I think what we did in the state legislature at the beginning of the pandemic was a testament to an ability to get together on a bipartisan basis and find the solution and work together to get things done. I don't think that anybody thinks that what Congress did throughout this crisis made any sense. Very partisan, continues to be very partisan, and as a result of that, certain efforts like the CARES Act were delayed. It was written in a way that didn't allow any of the aid to go directly to counties and towns and entities under a certain population base, which impacted many communities and towns in the congressional district, and also allowed for example, the governor to hold on to nearly $2 billion worth of CARES Act money that he's not released yet, that has to be released before the end of the year. But if you can think about that, if he had been able to release that money earlier, we would have been able to help on some of the small business areas. We've been able to help on the education areas. We've been able to help with some of the unemployment issues that are currently being impacting people. And I think there are things that the governor did far more slowly than he should have, including the restaurants. I mean, New York never went below quarter capacity, for example. Pennsylvania went to full capacity in the last, about a month ago or so. So there's a real contrast to how he dealt with the restaurants, and we need to reimburse many of these restaurants for these regards. But you need to get an individual down to Washington, D.C., who is going to say, you need to find these solutions. And my opponent complains about having to get PPE for his constituents when that is the day job. You have the responsibility to fight for your constituents every single day to make sure that they're safe.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we still have some other healthcare questions, more generic or broad, but we, as we are in the sort of, breadbasket here of the healthcare industry, whether it's pharmaceuticals or insurance, and we do have one of our chamber members, Delta Dental, a great company based right here in Morris County, on the call. So what are your views on national healthcare policy reform?
I think everybody who looks at the healthcare system right now realizes that it's broken. And any real solution that's going to solve, whether it's economic growth in a safe manner or healthcare coverage in a predictable and safe manner, I believe has to be bipartisan from its very inception. If you have a bipartisan piece of legislation, things like the Social Security Act, they last over time. And we need to protect Medicare, Medicaid. We need to protect Social Security. We need to invest in those those programs and keep them safe going forward and robust. And so we need to make sure that we not only have those programs and fulfilled, but we also need to have an individual who goes down there and understands that, okay, we need to cover pre-existing conditions. We need to have people on their health care. We cannot increase taxes in the way if kids stay on their health care coverage. Can't increase taxes in a way. We've got to have surprise medical billing like New York has. And that should be the national motto. I mean, the people in Washington, D.C. talk a lot about surprise medical billing, and they actually haven't solved it. I think if we look to the New York model, that's a great model for national coverage. I think so. If we focus on, I talked earlier, the nursing homes, skilled nursing is extraordinarily a part of the coverage, and we need to figure out ways to solve that issue going forward. We also need to make sure that there's a lot more transparency in the process, so you can understand from beginning of the process to the consumer where are the costs and where can you bring them out, and where can you make sure that whether it's a manufacturer or a person in the middle, how do you bring costs out of the system and so you can benefit the consumer? So there are a whole slew of things you can do from the national level while making sure that we have pre-existing conditions covered that will protect coverage, provide more coverage at a lower cost, and make sure that more people can both afford healthcare but also have access to affordable healthcare coverage.
Excellent, thank you. We have going in a different direction here in the Q&A. Senator, recently there was a video where LAPD officers were targeted and shot at. This question says, I'm nervous that this is a result of massive anti-police rhetoric. Between that huge threat and the threat of stripping police of qualified immunity and defunding the police, I don't think anyone is going to want to be a police officer anymore. What are your thoughts on supporting the police?
Well, actually, I talked to Assemblyman Brian Bergen about this issue, and he's got a really interesting and important idea where he understood very quickly that many of the defensive, physical defense practice that that police officers need to understand really aren't taught after the academies. So he wants to increase training, not reduce training every other year, so that these police officers have more and more skill sets. So you need more funding, not less. You need to get rid of the bad cops who are in the system, and there are ways we can bring those people out. We need to ban things like chokeholds. We need to make sure that there are more body cameras. All those things are extraordinarily important. We also need to respect and protect the police force. I mean, these are individuals who are extraordinarily well trained, who understand very clearly 99% believe 100% what public service is and needs to be about. And my opponent voted to strip their limited liability coverage, and that means that they and their families are less safe as they're going into cover those types of issues. I saw those, and so we need to get into. I've been supported by the PBA in this campaign, and because I understand that, but there are things you need to do that tie the community together and tie the tie the police with the community and the leadership of the community in ways. I mean, Mayor Baraka has done I thought, a very good job in working with the police, working with the community to find solutions that create jobs and make sure that people understand that the more that businesses are open, the more single proprietorships who are there because they've had a mortgage can continue to provide for their families. And so those are things that I think are important. And I've attended a number of Black Lives Matter events within the district. I understand, and it's important to root out any systemic racism that exists. And I think, but there are ways we can do that in ways that protect everybody and keep everybody safe within the system.
Great. Well, thank you. And we're going to move on back to business. So we are a business association, right? The Chamber of Commerce. We're very concerned about the health of business in this country, in the state, and in the Morris County area. There's a lot that the state and local municipalities do to impact the business environment here, whether it's friendly or not. From a federal level, though, it's a different story. In light of the pandemic, and a lot of people are complaining or bringing to the forefront our dependence on China for a lot of our supplies. PPEs was one of the things that really jumped out at us in the beginning. What is your stance on, I guess, a pro-America business platform, and what would you do in Washington, D.C. to support that?
Well, as I talked in the very beginning of my presentation, we need to have more supply chain here in the country, and ideally here in New Jersey. And we need to make sure that whether it's for 3 months or obviously more likely now 6 months, that we have a supply chain not only on PPE, but on manufacturing for our pharmaceutical companies, for manufacturing and vital minerals and materials. All those things I think need to be brought more home, brought closer to home, and that means that there are certain tax changes that we need to have. There are certain manufacturing changes we need to have. There needs to be a partnership with the state levels so that we can make sure that those manufacturing facilities can actually come here and in New Jersey. I mean, it makes a lot of sense to have a lot of the manufacturing a lot closer to our communities than they currently are. And as we're looking at ways to realistically have a major change in our commuting patterns because of what's happening right now in the country, I think there are ways we can offer many incentives within Morris County, and really throughout New Jersey, to have more manufacturing, more innovation. Whether it's Bell Labs. I mean, I was able to put Bill through and made sure we're able to incent more post and doctoral research incentive programs coming into New Jersey, but also on the innovation and small business side to do more production. And I also and actually getting down to Washington D.C. I think I'm probably the only person who's gotten a true tax cut through Phil Murphy, and because I had a need for manufacturing reduction, and I actually probably figured that out and through the NEP, and they were a great organization to work with in that regard. But that's the type of individual you need to have down in Washington, D.C. who understands how all of these things fit together, including making sure that the port continues to grow with its hundreds of thousands of jobs and billions of dollars of economic activity.
Great. So you've mentioned education, MIT, where in Massachusetts, where business begins and MIT meet, that sort of seamless. We're blessed today to have the president of Centenary College on the call, President Murphy. This isn't a question from him, but I would like you to talk a little bit about, you had mentioned postdoc research here in New Jersey. What can the federal government, and what would you do to help our amazing higher education institutes here in the state of New Jersey stay healthy? And again, like you mentioned with MIT, that's kind of a great model.
Well, I think what an important first step was the Rutgers merger. The fact that we were able to have, not now, we had 0, now we have 2 medical schools really within the state of New Jersey. We have a tied together law program, extraordinary undergraduate effort. And so having that happen meant that Rutgers actually could be more available for NIH loans and things like that. So you've actually seen a huge uptick in assistance from, to Rutgers and many of the other research programs, in part because now that they've changed the way that they were formatted, they were a lot more eligible. So that I think that's an important first step. I was happy to support those reforms when I served in the state as a state senator, because I think it was an important first step. I think going down to Washington, D.C. and understanding that higher education and as a member of the higher education committee in the state Senate, I've seen that you need to make sure that there are ways that these degrees are meaningful, that they were used in ways that people can advance their careers, to start their own businesses and continue to grow. And so being able to understand from a state level the ways that higher education is, has fostered so much innovation and so much growth, and figure out ways to deliver that in the online environment or in-person environment going forward is going to be an important part of what I do down in Washington, D.C.
Great. So this perfectly dovetails into the next question from one of our audience members here in terms of education. Now we're going into primary education. And the question is, some of our school districts are pushing remote learning. There are concerns in the community that students in towns such as Mount Olive or Dover who don't have adequate access to the technology needed to learn remotely. Is there any way the state or federal government can provide targeted resources to help these kids not fall behind just because they don't have a computer?
Mm-hmm. Well, Paul Sarlo, who's the head of the Budget Committee in the Senate, and I identified the digital divide months ago. So back in May, we put a bill through that would have allowed for more money to solve the digital divide, so you would be able to use that targeted technology solution. I also recognized that earlier when we were starting to have the online environment to make sure that there was more resources available in that regard. Unfortunately, Governor Murphy vetoed that measure and just absolutely vetoed it and said he did not want to have those funds at that time. He came back to the drawing board about 2 months later and started to put money into that fund a couple of months later in late July. And so I think that we need to continue to identify what the technology is. We need to have broadband that's in every single zip code that's high speed and functional in every single zip code. I mean, there are a variety of things we can do as from an infrastructure perspective, as well as a specific computer technology perspective, to make sure we bridge that digital divide, because I think everybody on this phone call knows it's real. And we need to make sure that every single kid coming out of our higher education, our primary, middle and secondary education, are college ready or career ready, and they have the equal start in their race in life. And that, I think that starts with a high school education that is meaningful and allows them to do that.
Great, thank you very much. So we're moving back into energy policy. I know you discussed some of it earlier, but we do have some representatives on the call from both of our energy providers in this region, JCP&L, PSE&G, Hey Everton, Hey Jose. So the question here is, what are your views on a national energy policy? I know you talked about it a little bit earlier, but if you can get into a little more detail of how it's sort of localized here in New Jersey.
Well, I think that when you're looking at the energy generation, energy delivery, first and foremost that needs to happen is better communication. We need to understand, I mean, the consumers need to know real time where the outages really are and what needs to, how it impacts them, and that timeline for reopening, needs to be clear, because the consumers need to have faith in the system. And I think there are ways we can enhance communication efforts. But at the end of the day, you also need to have a situation where, from a national energy policy, I would be just about all ways to provide energy. I mean, we've got nuclear power here in New Jersey. We've been developing. I was a prime sponsor of the Offshore Wind Development Act back in 2010. We need the solar and other alternate technologies that as they grow and become more effective, and battery storage becomes better. There's many other ways to have generation and redundancy and retention on the grid. You also need to have a redundant system, so that when certain areas go down, there's actually a redundancy in that system. And that all takes an individual who knows the importance of infrastructure, and as you're having the conversation with that national grid on that regard, as well as on the infrastructure regard, on the education side and communications high speed, and all those things are tied together. So we need to be self-reliant, and we need to make sure we're energy independent, so in case there are pressures from the outside the country, that we're much more secure than we have been.
Great, thank you very much. So moving on here to another very sort of very local for us in the state of New Jersey here is, your opponent has stated to our membership that two of his priorities for the district are SALT reforms and infrastructure. We've talked a lot about infrastructure, but we haven't jumped on the SALT conversation yet. So what has changed and what has remained the same, and what are your views on the SALT reforms?
Well, I discussed it in the very beginning. We need to restore the SALT deduction. My opponent talked a great deal about it in his first campaign, and he's talked a lot about it in the second campaign, and it's not the law of the land. And we need an individual who can go down to Washington, D.C., starting in January, and say, this is what we need to change as we safely grow our way out of the economy. We need to have an individual who knows how to create economic reform that includes things like restoring the SALT deduction, that includes other new ways, economic incentives and tax changes that will grow the economy. We need to have the SALT deduction on a bipartisan basis, but my opponent has shown that as much as he talks about it, he can't get it done. Everybody in New Jersey wants to restore the SALT deduction, but he's proven himself incapable of actually getting it done. And so you need an individual somebody down to Washington, D.C., who knows how to get tax reform done, has it, finds the common definitions, and can actually get it done for the taxpayers in New Jersey.
Yeah, thank you so much for that answer. Moving on here, we have a question, what are your thoughts on the practicality and the safety integrity of the paper ballots and our current voting system? A lot of talk about that and everywhere you go, so really we would like to know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, we need a postal system that is safe and secure, and that means it has to have the right amount of funding. We all remember in the first stages of the pandemic that the postal worker was our one connection with the outside world. And I remember that individual crossing my lawn, and that's postal services tied us together for a century, and it's going to tie us together for centuries more. And so that's an important, we need to make sure the postal service is protected, but we also need to make sure that the reforms that were started in the Obama administration are continued, so it's effective, but at a cost that is affordable for the taxpayer. So you can do both. That's number one. Number two, we will support, obviously I support a vote by mail system, but I think there should be more. There should be in-person voting. There should be ballot boxes in every single district, every single community within my the 7th Congressional District. Right now, 42% of the towns in the 7th Congressional District are not eligible to receive ballot boxes for, to have in their community, and that's wrong. You know, my first bill in the state legislature, the second bill, was to get a bill through on a bipartisan basis to expand voting options. I expanded the bill, you know, increased polling from 7 a.m. to 6 a.m., increased the pay of poll workers at the time, and that was done on a bipartisan basis. I was in the majority party, the Republican governor, Republican Senate, and I reached into Alvio Series at the time, who's now a member of Congress and was later a speaker, who had not passed many pieces of legislation before he got in the majority. And I said, this has to be done on a bipartisan basis. So we got it done on a bipartisan basis. So I want people to have confidence in their vote, whether it's in the vote by mail system, which has to be safe and secure. The drop box system, I would have preferred an in-person, so we'd have more options. But right now I'm doing everything I can, and our campaign is doing everything we can to make sure that people understand that voting by mail is safe and secure, and people need to return their ballots through the mail or through the drop boxes.
Great, thank you. Alan, I see your mouth moving, but I can't hear you.
I got it.
Rookie mistake number 2.
I know. I recognized it. I want to go on the record. I recognized it before you pointed it out, but I did the rookie mistake again. So with the vote by mails, speaking of mistakes, there's a valid concern. I was talking to some mayors yesterday, and their residents are confused, and people are worried about even good or clerks in, like the one we have in Morris County here, when they have to hire temporary workers and have all of their resources strained. There may be people that don't get ballots, people that get the wrong ballots, and then there's the idea of you have to count all of the ballots, and then you have to count all of the ballots that are in by the election day, then the ones that are in a week later, and then there's the provisional ballots, which presumably you have to wait to count until the others are counted. So this could, even if everything goes well, it would be 2 weeks before we may have results in some close races. I'm sure you've talked about this a lot internally with your campaign and just as a public policy for your constituents. Can you just discuss, your observations here and what the public should be aware of?
Well, there were many issues in New Jersey in the municipal elections that many people read about, in the primary elections. You saw just now in Sussex County, there were nearly 1,700 ballots that were found last week, I think it was. I think the most important thing that an individual can do is when they get the ballots, return them. And you tell everybody else that they need to return them. There are ways that you can identify online to make sure that the ballot is being tallied. I believe that we're probably one of the only states on the East Coast that is doing an all vote by mail system. I think that we should have had more options to allow more enfranchisement, not the current system, but the current system has to be safe and secure. And I believe that it is. And we need to do everything we can to make sure that people return their ballots on a timely fashion and have confidence that their voices and their votes are heard.
Yeah, and I would just say, when I told the elected official that if you go to the polling place, you'd have to vote provisionally, and your ballot will be delayed in being opened. So if at all possible, vote and drop yours off at the polling place rather than mail it. And it's an inconvenience, but you should have them sitting in your home, and you should pick them up and bring them as soon as you get them and vote them, and not wait to go to the polling place or not wait till the week before the election.
I think on a number of different websites, probably on your clerk's website, there are very clear instructions as to how, if you can drop them off, for example, at the clerk's office, or if you can drop them off on these drop boxes, or if you can drop them off in the mailbox. It's very clear and online what the rules are. But I think the earlier you get to vote, the better it is. The more you talk to people about the importance of getting everybody to vote. I mean, that's who we are as a democracy, right? Every time you vote, you re-emphasize the founding premise of our country, where we are citizens. And listen, I loved and when I went to polling place with my daughters and my wife, and voting with them. Because when you were doing the in-person voting, not only were you able to talk about some of the things that were going on in the country, but you were also able to do it with your daughter, with my daughters. But we were also able to see our neighbors and see our friends, and it was a way to show and understand our community in a way on it many times a year, and that's a reinforcing part of who we are as a country. So my hope is, my expectation is that we'll be able to do in-person balloting in the not too distant future. But right now, it's extraordinarily important that people understand that the vote by mail system is safe and secure, and they need to send their ballots in. If they have any questions, please feel free to call my campaign or call the clerk's office.
I've just emphasized too to read the when you said that there are instructions. It's very important to read those instructions, because there's an inner envelope and an outer envelope. If you don't use the inner envelope, and if you don't seal both envelopes, your vote could be invalidated. So it's very important you do read and follow those instructions. And just an aside, you talk about in-person voting. It's nice to see people and have that public experience. One of my friends went to vote one day, and he opened the door, and he was holding it open for Bruce Springsteen. So you never know who you'll see when you vote.
All right. So, Senator, thank you so much for being here. We're coming close to the end. We have one last question, then we'll hand it back to Alan, Megan, and you for closing comments. And of course, this last question is kind of saved for last, because we are living in a highly charged political era. So your opponent has criticized you for support of President Trump. Can you discuss where you agree and disagree with President Trump?
Certainly. I think there are things that we need to focus on going forward together as a country. The Gateway Project is extraordinarily important. I prioritize that in a way that the administration has not. I would support restoring the SALT deduction, so we can get that back in our tax code. We need to fix our infrastructure and grow the economy in ways that are important for the future of our society. I grew up as an environmentalist, and met my wife at the Environmental Protection Agency. So there are priorities that I differ with great frequency on things like the environment. But I think we can do things together in a common ground way to find solutions. But the real question here is about getting an individual down to Washington, D.C., who can work with whomever the president is to find the solutions on behalf of the constituents of this district. I've done that on business development issues, on the Republican and Democratic governors, and I've been the majority of the minority. I've done that on healthcare. I've done that on environmental protection. I've done that on so many different fronts that actually identify real solutions that will help the citizens of this state. And if you go down to Washington, D.C., I'll be able to have that exact same work ethic to actually accomplish things on behalf of this district. My opponent talks a great deal and says a lot of things about a lot of other people, but he's actually not accomplished things for the people of this 7th congressional district in a way that has made their lives any more affordable. And when he addresses issues down Washington, D.C., one of the things that the chamber noted very clearly when they gave me their endorsement was that he was a very, very partisan individual down in Washington, D.C. And that's not what this state needs right now. Right now, we need an individual who can go down to Washington, D.C. and find the common ground, find the solutions, and actually create more jobs and economic opportunity, fix the broken healthcare system, actually restore the SALT deduction, make sure that we got the Gateway Project funded. And these are the things that we can do for people of New Jersey, and we need to actually get them done.
Excellent. Well, thank you. We did have one last question sneak in here under the wire, and it is everything being done to make sure businesses are open in New Jersey as fully as possible as soon as science proves it's safe to do so? This is to help our businesses and our employees.
I think we need to make sure that businesses, just like schools, are opening safely, and we make sure that we can protect our residents. But I think that we need to be able to follow CDC recommendations. We need to work in a partnership with obviously our own state health regulations. I think there are things that other states have done. I mean, when people look at what Governor Murphy talked about, and he said we're going to do everything as part of a region. We were the only ones in the region that didn't open up on a regional basis. We were the only ones in the region that didn't allow for at least quarter in-person dining as a state throughout the course of the summer. I mean, there are many other things that the governor did individually that other states did not. So I think there are things we can do and learn from what other states have done, including coming out and we're looking at things, how to keep people safe, things like the nursing homes. We've got to understand what happened there, how we can make sure that people are safer going forward so that decisions that were made both in New York and New Jersey in those regards are not repeated.
Senator, I just want to thank you and just want to mention that that last question, we're pleased to have Morris County Freeholder Typhoon Celine here. So we thank him for joining us and thank everyone for joining us. I'm going to make some announcements and then I'll turn it over to Mike or Megan for closing remarks. But just to want to remind everyone, we have Assemblywoman Pinto Marin, who's the Assembly Budget Chair on the 22nd of this month at 2 p.m. And then in the neighboring congressional district in Morris County, we have Congresswoman Cheryl on October 14th at noon. And we have her opponent, Rosemary Becci, at the 15th of October at noon. I want to give a big virtual thank you to Senator Kean for participating and wish him luck, thank him for his remarks. And I want to then turn it back over to Megan or Mike to close and wish everyone a great day.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you, Senator, for being with us today. At the Chamber, we bring you this Meet the Candidate series so you can make informed decisions for your business and your household, as well as ask questions of the candidate directly. So I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Mike Sanzilis's new title. In addition to being Vice President of Membership, he is now the Vice President of Government Affairs. So we're so glad that he stepped into this role, and we thank him for his leadership on this. So look forward to hearing more from him as well in this new capacity. So I'll hand it over to him for some closing remarks.
Well, Senator Kean, thank you, Megan, and thank you, Senator Kean, for being here today. You know, I think what we really appreciate is that you answered these questions directly. You didn't dance around it, you know, and I think that's important for our members and our business community to hear from you the unvarnished truth of your opinions and how you want to get things done. So we really appreciate your honesty and candor in this forum, and hand it back to you for any closing comments. And again, thank you very much. And thanks to all of our members of the Morris County Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you all. Stay safe.
Thank you very much. And thank you for joining me in wearing ties. I'm trying to start a new trend. So.